as I said, like it's supposed to be a conversation for myself to learn from you, and I hope that it'll help someone else too. But some of the things that I wanted to ask you, Scott, was a lot around how you started getting intro on entrepreneurship, first of all, because you told me about your dad being an entrepreneur as well. So I just want to start off with what was your childhood like? How did you grow up?
I grew up really poor. When I was born, my dad was delivering milk in the morning and loading trucks at Sears in the afternoon. And this was in New England, in Massachusetts, and it was winter. And he came home one day and said, "God damn it! If I have to be poor, I don't have to be cold," because he couldn't afford to feed the family and have the heat turned on in the place they were renting. So he packed up me and whatever they had and moved to LA. I grew up with somebody who didn't come from anything, but who became self-made. He had drive, he had determination, he had intelligence. He didn't have a college degree, he didn't have any formal training at all. So, but one thing he couldn't do naturally is sell. And so he wound up getting a job in the mailroom at Marshall Electronics and kept pestering them about letting him sell. And they kept saying he didn't have a college degree, so he couldn't sell electronic components to engineers and people in aerospace and defense. And he kept bugging them. And finally, they threw him a bag and parts and said, brochures, and said, "Fine, you want to sell, go try." Turned out he could, even though he didn't have any training. So for me, growing up, I guess seeing that kind of drive, that kind of persistence was very important. The refusing to settle for where you are in life and wanting more. So I grew up with that role model, even though I didn't grow up with anyone with an education. I graduated from college. I was the first person from both sides of my family to graduate from college. So that kind of tells you where I came from. When I was growing up, dad had left the company, started his own electronics distribution company, and started to get not successful, but started to actually make some money with it as before he found any success. And we moved from very poor, basically ghetto neighborhood to a middle class, lower middle class neighborhood, but that was being built. And there were a bunch of homes being built. So one of the things I did as a kid, I was probably 14, 13,
Hmm.
14. And I saw the lunch trucks going around to the different job sites. And so I timed them. And then I had my mom take me to the grocery store, and I used what money I had saved, because I always wound up saving money, to buy some sodas, to buy some sandwich materials. And so I made a bunch of sandwiches. In my wagon, I went to the lunch sites a little ahead of the lunch trucks and sold to the guys there, and wound up making quite a bit of money until the lunch trucks called the sheriff and had me hauled in, and my parents had to come. It's quite a scene. But, I've always thought about, how do I do things myself? How do I be self-reliant? I don't do well working for other people. I've tried that. Entrepreneurship.
What was the first job you had where you were employed?
Uh, After undergrad, I was recruited into the executive management program for National Medical Enterprises, and fast track to being an executive there. And the CEO and I got along great, but I made enemies of all the VPs within weeks of me being there. And it just not cut out for being in a large bureaucratic environment. When I see inefficiencies, I just want to crush them. There are better ways to do things. The company should be doing it. It shouldn't matter who wants to do it or who gets credit for it or whatever. It's just, if there are better ways to do it, we should be doing it. But that wasn't the nature of that very large Fortune 500 bureaucracy. So I didn't last long. I quit that. And then I went to work for a fixed income broker dealer. And after 6 months there, I was the first newbie they ever had that broke his draw the first month working there. I mean, I just pounded the phones. And we were, selling fixed income to banks and credit unions and cities, pension funds, that kind of thing. After 6 months, I went into the CEO's office and I said, "This is easy. I don't need to work for you." And so I left and I started my own broker dealer. And a year later, I bought that one. So uh,
So on that, I was reading a little bit about you, and in 1987, you founded a trust company,
mhm,
which you built to $1 billion in AUM, and
mhm.
then you sold to Commerce Bank. Um, was this the first company you started?
No, not the first company I started. I had the broker dealer before that, uh,
Okay.
and a couple different broker dealers actually before that. And I started the trust company because I saw that uh, in when you're trading bonds, you use what's called Monroe calculations. Use Monroe trader, and that is if you're buying a 7% yield or a 6% yield or a 5% yield on a bond, they do it with this device, this Monroe calculations, now
Hmm.
incorporated into the Bloomberg terminals. It's very different than time value of money calculations that in finance is what you learn and really is how the world works. And I found out that I could take the two different sets of calculations and basically arbitrage them. So I could sell bonds on Monroe yields and buy them on time value money or vice versa. And there was a nice chunk of change there to be made, especially if I was servicing the interest payments on them. So I created what now would be called a fintech, but wasn't a word for it then, uh, which was a technology driven trust company to to custody and handle fixed income investments on behalf of institutional customers and the broker dealers that serve them. So I created that company, wrote a lot of software. I hired a software engineer. He created the software. I created the math models, but he then incorporated them and built a pretty successful company. But it really took off, and you need a lot of cash to finance the transactions between bond coupons and yields that they've been sold at. So I wound up selling to a bank, Commerce Bank, and I became SVP in charge of trust at the bank, and we had the entire second floor of the bank.
So I want to ask you, what's the first major win you had? Was this the first major win for you in your mind?
Well, it was a major win, but then the bank had been. This was at a time of the RTC crisis, and the bank had been cooking their books and making bad loans to the chairman's friends and things. And I
Hmm.
came to work one day, and there was FDIC tape over the doors, and basically I sued the bank and the FDIC to get my asset, the company, back, saying it was a fraudulently induced contract. And I learned that when the government takes control of an asset, possession is 10/10 of the law. And so uh, they sold my trust company, which was the bank's trust company then, to I forget which, to one of the big banks.
Hmm.
And I saw the money because I was getting paid over time. I saw the money that I had made from selling it just evaporate. I wound up with nothing from that. So yes, I made a sizable fortune and never got it. So it was my first win and also my first heartbreak.
So what was the driving factor at that time for you when you were first kind of getting into building companies and actually selling them? Like, has your drive for why you build a company changed?
No, I don't paint. I don't play music. I wish I did. I just don't have the talent for it. So my creative outlet is with a business. So when I get an idea for something and I see something that I think needs to exist that can fill a market need, it causes me pain to not do it. I have to do it. I do a lot of writing, and sometimes it's similar to that. I'll wake up already having written a blog, a book, whatever in my head, and it caused me pain not to get on a keyboard and get it out. And I understand that that's common with people who are truly artistic. Again, I'm not artistic, but my creative outlet is creating a company. It's nothing about the economics. It's about building this thing that needs to exist, and I can do that.
Why did you decide to go to MIT? Since you were already building, you'd already built companies before that.
Well, it was an executive program, first of all, and it was what they called Birthing of Giants, and it was Dean Roberts coupled with the Young Entrepreneurs Organization that they chose 60 young entrepreneurs from around the country to come and experiment on us, put us into this program. So we were all in the dorms at Endicott House, which is their executive campus, and it was Ted Leonsis from AOL and Brad Feld and a bunch of other great people in the class. And it was an extraordinary opportunity that I just wanted to do. I was invited and I said yes.
I want to ask you on that. So, do you think entrepreneurship is teachable?
I think being an entrepreneur is not teachable. I think that if people are wired to be an entrepreneur, that they can learn the fundamentals of what it's going to take. So, for instance, if somebody is a passionate engineer, also is wired to be an entrepreneur and to start a company and to go through all the pain, then he can, or she can learn accounting and human relation and fundraising and marketing and sales and all the other aspects that are needed to being an entrepreneur. I recently read a book written by the guy who founded Grubhub, and is an engineer from MIT and a great engineer. But as he was building the company, and he built it because he had to build it because he wanted pizza delivered to him, and there's no efficient way to do it. So it really, really good book. It was a fun read as an entrepreneur about everything he went through. But he went through that process. He's like, oh man, I got to get out there, go door to door and sell. And he's an engineer by training, but being wired to being an entrepreneur, like, all right, he had to go, for him, it was a lot of school of hard knocks to learn some of these things, as well as then having some great advisors. But so I think if you're wired to be an entrepreneur, then regardless of what your foundation is, you will learn the other skills you need in order to create a business.
What does it mean to be wired as an entrepreneur?
Being able to see the future of the thing that you're building and understanding why you're building it, not what you're building necessarily, but why, obviously the what, but the Simon Sinek of what you're building and all the steps you're going to have to go through to get from zero to building this thing, this company, and getting it launched. And then having the drive, the persistence, the willingness to starve and sacrifice in order to create this company. And very few people are wired that way. You can tell people what it takes to be an entrepreneur, but once they get into it, they're just not wired for it. They don't have the persistence, the willingness to starve, to fall on their sword, to rise to the occasion, to learn other skill sets. It's a pretty unique combination.
When you started Epoch Networks, which became the largest privately held ISP at that time,
Mm-hmm.
was that the first time you raised venture capital?
Yes.
So tell me about that. When you had no, let's say, no connections or the ability to raise capital that you do at this point, how did you go about it? What were the challenges at that time?
Well, it was all new for me. The internet was starting to get some buzz. Um, so I had read an article about a kid named Mark Andreessen at the University of Illinois, and he'd written this Mozilla thing on this internet thing, and it just instantly hit me that this was the future of communications. And I decided I had to start, and I was in the securities business. I'm like, I have to start this company. And so I put an ad in the paper for somebody that knows anything about this internet thing. I want to
Hmm.
start a company. Come join me from an engineering perspective. And a guy named Matt Mandalek, he ran the DARPANet node in Seal Beach at Rockwell, and he came over and interviewed. And like, okay, why are you here? You're working for a Fortune 500 company, and this is extremely risky because this is a company I was going to start, that I wanted to start, and didn't have any capital, didn't have anything at the time. This was in Newport Beach. And he said, look, I'm gay and I have AIDS. And you can imagine what my life is like working for a defense contractor. It's
Wow.
just hell. And he said, so if you can promise me that you'll always have health insurance for me, then, and him and his partner, then I'll come work for you and help you build this. And I said, done. And so he came and joined. And then I learned that the internet didn't exist yet, really. It was DARPANET and the educational network. And we had to sign agreements that we wouldn't transit commercial traffic on them. And so people were creating siloed networks at the time, the CompuServe network and others of the day. They wouldn't actually interchange data. You couldn't send email from one to another. So I joined the board of the Commercial Internet Exchange, and I'm getting to your question. It's just a little bit of a long-winded answer. I joined the board of the Commercial Internet Exchange, and I actually became the face of a lot of the regulatory affairs, the startup, working with the team at Piper in Washington, D.C., testifying before Congress, working with Chairman Black at the FCC to try to keep them from regulating this new internet thing, and working with a lot of the senators and representatives. And there were a number of prominent network companies at the time, UNet, PSINet, and a number of others. Sprint was really for kicks, was our sugar daddy. They were funding everything. And so we bought a router from John and Marilyn's little company called Cisco, and we put it in a closet at Digital Equipment Corporation in Palo Alto, and we connected our private networks together at that router and formed a commercial internet. That router is now in the Smithsonian. So it's pretty cool to have something that's in the Smithsonian, and kind of sucks to be old enough to have something in the Smithsonian.
Have you seen it? Have you been to the
No,
Smiths?
I was when they called me and let me know that it was going in and they were having an induction ceremony. I was in Europe at the time and I couldn't get back for it. And really, really, one of my great regrets in life was not being there. So anyhow, now this internetwork had been created, and you had a situation where it could start to grow, and venture capitalists started to get interested in it. And I was pretty prominent during the day. And so I started getting calls from VC firms out of the blue. And that led to my first round of capital, which was a $6 million round for Epoch. And I would go on to raise over $100 million over time with that company. But that, in this case, people were interested in what was happening, and I was one of the leaders in it. And so the game came to me. I didn't really have to go chase it. Not that it was easy. I still had to put together all the materials, all the decks, had to go pitch people, still got a lot of rejections, but it was different than people who have to go, gee, I need money, and they don't have any relationships or any connections, or people aren't calling them. They then have to go figure it out.
So, for someone who's raising their first round, have never raised capital before, what do you tell those people typically?
It's going to be hard. You better enjoy sales because you're selling yourself, your vision. If it's your first round, you're probably selling your vision of what you're going to build or what you are building, not what you've built. So you better be really good at telling that story and the why of what you're doing, the problems it solves, and you need to do it in a succinct way and in a way that engages people. You need to quickly ascertain the people that you're talking to. It's this sell me this pen thing. Is this something that the person I'm talking to is interested in? Is it even in their investment thesis? Is it something that they would do? If you're a fintech entrepreneur like me and you're talking to somebody who only invests in healthcare, then you might as well be talking about the weather or golf or travel or something, because they're not going to invest. Don't waste your time or theirs. If they're only a Series C or a Series B investor and you're trying to raise seed capital, again, it's fine. Have them involved, keep them in the loop, but don't look to them for capital. Maybe ask them for introductions to people that do. So know that you're going to have to pitch a lot.
I've noticed this about you both at Fortress and Gigpay. You're you're very good at managing expectations, I feel like, when it comes to investors.
I
Um,
usually sandbag. I don't. I tend to always sandbag. I would rather under promise and over deliver.
so I wanna ask you about the next company you had. This would have been the original iTunes, but then you kind of mentioned that there was a closure of the capital markets when the dot-com bubble burst. And then you sold this to Loudeye and then took a couple of years off actually to travel. How did that feel? Like, what was that experience like? What came out of the travel period for you?
Um, the I'm currently reading "Build: An Unorthodox Guide to Making Things Worth Making" by Tony Fadell, and he was the guy that was at Apple with Steve Jobs, helped create the iPod and the iPhone, and he went on, left there, and created Nest. He was the
Hmm.
CEO and founder of Nest, but he talks about a company that he started when the dot-com bubble burst, and he did 80 venture capital pitches and got 80 rejections for
Wow.
what was pretty good company. There's just no access to capital. And the same thing happened to me when I started OnAir. I was building that. We'd raised quite a bit of venture capital. And we were doing all the encoding. The music labels would ship us boxes of their gold masters, and we were doing the ripping and encoding it for the future of downloading music and streaming music and things like that. I was on retainer to the Recording Industry Association of America. I was representing them, helping them with the Napster case and with BitTorrents. I testified to Congress on their behalf. So I was a good guy in the music industry from a technology perspective. I used to say I was the dumbest guy in the music industry because I don't know anything about music, but do know a thing about technology, and I'm passionate about believing that people who create things deserve to get paid for those things, and that includes music and books and other things too. So I was building this company that was going to be pretty big, I think, but when the dot-com bubble burst, access to capital just dried up. It was for everybody, not just Tony Fadell building his company. And I wound up doing a fire sale to a company in Seattle called Loudeye, and it was really so the employees would keep jobs, the company would continue to exist. My understanding is eventually that company was bought by a company in Cupertino and turned my technology into a little thing called iTunes. So that would have been us, but access to capital dried up and we weren't able to get there. So it was really cool. It would have become iTunes.
So, like, what were you feeling at that time? Because you took a break, kind of, from things. Like, what was that break like? What did you do there after
No,
that?
I started another company right away, and I shouldn't have. I
Mm.
started fan mail, which would enable artists to sell email addresses to their fans, and just didn't have the capital, and there was no money available. It didn't matter how good an idea was, and so we wound up having to close that business, even though we're signing up every kind of band and celebrity you can imagine for it. So that sucked. That's my most heartbreaking failure because that was fun and that would have been really really cool. I did search engine arbitrage for a little startup called Google. Um, we were repackaging website search traffic from all kinds of organizations and charities and others, and then basically reselling it to Google and Ask Jeeves and others in bulk. I knew that was not a business that would ever be sold. That was just a business that was going to be a cash cow for a while. I could see the writing on the wall that Google eventually would eat our lunch. And I told everybody associated with the company that. So we made money on that for a while. And then one day Google had AdWords and the ability to monetize traffic from your within directly. And within a matter of months, our traffic went to zero, and that was it. But that was okay because it was expected. But I did a number of these kinds of projects when I was in a state of semi-retirement. I also traveled. I went to Europe. I was on a sailboat in the Med, and I did some cliche kinds of things. And that was until I saw in November of 2011 what was the Entrepreneurs Access to Capital Act by Rep. McHenry in the House of Representatives, later to become the Jobs Act in the Senate. And I said, oh man, they're going to let entrepreneurs raise capital using the internet. This could really transform things. And this is securities, it's internet technology, it's all the things I know. I have to build this company, same kind of thing, a creative thing. This company needs to exist. And so I started a company called FundAmerica to provide B2B services to real estate syndicators, crowdfunding portals, broker-dealers, and others who are going to use these new regulations to raise capital. And so, it's kind of been my journey between, dot-com meltdown and then just doing a few things and then going that. And I had remarried, and I went to my wife when I decided I was going to start FundAmerica, and I said, I have to go back to work. And she said, well, you do work hard. You work really hard on these businesses that we've built. And I said, no, you haven't seen me work yet. You don't know what it means to really start a company.
How is it different from?
Because these other businesses took, a few hours a day. They were not an all-in commitment. Starting FundAmerica, I knew it was going to take an all-in commitment, that I was going back to work. And I'd been remarried because of the dot-com meltdown, like a lot of people, and my marriage went to shit and wound up getting divorced. So I'd gotten remarried during this, what I considered to be a lull in my career. And when I told her that I was going back to work, she didn't understand what that meant. She knows now. She didn't understand what that meant. I tried to explain what it meant. Like, no, let me prepare you.
You read a lot of biographies, and you're a very passionate reader. I want to ask you, whose story do you resonate with the most in terms of your own life? Is there any book that stands out to you?
And Horowitz, Hard Thing About Hard Things. That's probably one of my favorite books.
Why is that?
All the shit he went through building a company, what it took to start it, the battles he had to fight internally and externally, the things he went through to finally have a success, what it means when you exit a company, and the emotions and that he went through. It's just like it's a complete entrepreneurial journey, the good and the hard. I won't necessarily say the bad, but yeah, a lot of bad, but just the hard shit that you gotta go through. I love that book.
What's the hardest thing for you right now in terms of building a company? Has the hard changed for you?
Well, I'm starting another company, another fintech with Gigpay, and when I've done angel investments, I always look at the founders, and most founders are looking for money because they don't have any money, right? But occasionally you run across somebody that's out trying to raise a seed round or an angel round, and they have money. They have some personal wealth. And my question is, why are you raising money? Why aren't you putting your own money? How much of your own money you put in this? And sometimes it's like, well, I haven't put in any money. I'm putting in my time. It's like, no. If you're all in, if you're in on building a business, then you've got to be putting in your own money as well. And so I wouldn't invest in those. Now, if somebody's putting in money, I don't mind co-investing with them. It's like, okay, great. Let's all do this, especially if I feel I can add to it. So with Gigpay, I'm fortunate not to have to go raise seed capital out of need. I have raised some seed capital from some people who are either very close friends or are very strategic with what I'm doing. But mostly I've funded it myself, and I can continue to fund it myself. And we'll go raise a Series A at some point, but not in any rush to do it. So whereas normally when I start a company, I'm not only focused on defining the product and working with the people who are the software engineers and people who are building it and building the rest of the team, and also trying to sell, but I'm also so focused and engrossed in raising capital that it takes my eye off the ball of building a company, because raising capital takes a lot of hours. And when you're doing, that's hours you're not spending on other aspects of the business. So the cool thing about what I'm doing now and where I'm at is I don't have to spend that huge amount of time raising capital. I can spend that time on making sure the software is coming along, that the vendor and the partner relationships we have are right, that the team is on track with the vision that I have for what we're building. And I've actually never had that experience before. It's awesome to be able to spend just complete focus on the operational and all of the business stuff and not be Oliver with my plate going, please, sir, may
So I want to ask you about this because um, I don't think you explicitly ever talked about the culture you're building in the different companies you've built. But there is like an ethos that I see in Fortress that is also in Gigpay. There is some sort of a culture of meritocracy. What is the kind of company you want to show up at work at?
where everyone is there for the same reason. It's a meritocracy, and people are passionate about the mission and what we're doing. And it's like I talk about when I started Epic, and Matt was my first hire, and he was gay and had AIDS. I didn't hire him or give him any consideration because, for DEI, and
Yeah.
I don't give a shit about that. Absolutely don't. And by not giving a shit about things like, diversity, I don't care. And what I find is that when I have a meritocracy, I wind up with an incredibly diverse company because we just hire the best people we can. At Epic, Matt, the company grew past Matt and found a place for him, and then had another guy as my CTO, and it grew past him. And then I wound up with Santa, who is a female Persian, as my CTO of a network engineering company. There were no females. You go to the NANOG, which was the North American Network Operators Group, the NANOG meetings, she was literally the only female there. And not only she was a female, she was the CTO of one of the most prominent internet companies. I didn't give her any consideration because she was female. She was hired because she was the best person for the job. She was awesome. And so on top of that, you want to have a culture that focuses on meritocracy, that is willing to put in the hours and to put in the time, that's passionate about the mission and what we're doing, doesn't judge people,
Hmm.
and has fun together building whatever the thing is that the company is doing.
But when I look at your businesses before, they've mostly been US centric. But Gigpay is not that. So what prompted you to go beyond to serving for the global economy?
I wanted to build payments for many years. I started to build one company, but unfortunately I had a controlling shareholder and chairman who decided he didn't want it to compete with other business interests, and he wound up wrecking it. Then I built another company, Fortress, which it wound up getting a lot of legs as a banking as a service fintech, and it grew very fast that way. I wanted to pivot it to payments, but it just didn't do that. And by payments, I don't mean consumers making payments. I mean businesses that have to pay their payees, their gig workers, their influencers, their contractors, their affiliates, their royalties, bond interest payments, stock dividend payments, whatever. Right? There's all of these payments that have to be made, or that are made all the time, and it's a global activity. It's not something that's just domestic. And so I knew that a vision for a payments business was going to be and is going to be a global business. There's no two ways around it.
So on that topic, like how did you come up with this idea? What was I know you've been in the music industry. How did this sort of come together?
Well, I was in the music industry back in the dot-com days and the early 2000s. After that, I was out of it, and then I wound up in securities primarily, and then crypto. So I'm just going back to some of my music roots because I still have credibility and relationships in that industry, and paying royalties to musicians and songwriters and agents and keyboard engineers and roadies. There are organizations that pay billions of dollars a year in royalties to millions of people everywhere in the world, right? And especially Latin America, besides US, especially Latin America, India, Japan, South Korea, China, it's huge. And so I've dusted off some of my music industry relationships and went and had conversations with people about my vision and the value prop for what I was intending to build or what I wanted to build, what I thought needs to exist, and got tremendous validation for my idea. And so then went out and said, all right, I'm going to build this.
Imagine the person talking to you has no idea on how to build a business, which is why I'm asking these questions. How do you judge validation? Is it when people say we'll actually pay? What are the ways that you kind of discern that?
Well, again, if you're like an angel investor or a venture investor evaluating a business plan, there are a number of things that you have to look at, right? One is the why. Why does this company or product need to exist? The what are you going to build? And, again, one of my favorite books is Simon Sinek, Start With Why. So a lot of this just comes from that. And then the how are you going to build it? So you evaluate these things, but then another thing you have to look at is what's the revenue model, right? Not just what's the team. You need to look at what's the team. You need to look at, or who the team is. You need to look at what the product is and why it exists and what the adoption is going to be. And then you need to look at the revenue model. And a lot of entrepreneurs or would-be entrepreneurs, want-to-be entrepreneurs, overlook that. They don't have the revenue model in their plan. It's like, well, you've got to make money. How is this going to make money? How are people going to pay for this service that needs to exist? And so, when I was looking at starting Gigpay, I had to check all of those boxes, which means, first of all, here's what I'm thinking needs to exist and why it needs to exist, because there's payment pain that music royalty organizations have trouble getting their people paid globally, their royalty recipients paid. And I believed that, and I believed that the what I was going to build would solve that. And then I went out and got validation for that. And then it's like, all right, how am I going to make money? How's this company going to monetize this activity? And what does that look like? So, I created a financial model right out of the gate. And so if you want to be an entrepreneur, then you have to follow those steps. Why do you want to build this thing? Are you sure that there's market need for it? How are you going to go find that market? How are you going to get them to buy your better mousetrap or whatever? And how are you going to make money from it? And what's that look like? What's it going to cost you to build? What's the time to revenue? What does the revenue look like? And, I didn't do that with web biographies. I built it purely because of passion. I wanted to create this thing for family trees and journals and stuff. And I figured I could get other people to buy it and even help sell it. But I didn't really model out how big the market was for it or what the take rate would be. And the company didn't work out because I didn't nail that down. Common shortfall with people who starting companies, especially for the first time.
Let's talk about people who start multiple companies. What are the common pitfalls that serial founders, serial entrepreneurs make? You can talk from your own experience. Like, what is something you like over-indexed on maybe, and you were like, wait, I should have just not done that.
Well, a lot of times you get enamored on the technology, but a lot of times, look, and again, as Ben Horowitz says in his book, is you'll create a product you're passionate about, you'll go to market, and the market will basically bitch slap you and tell you it needs to be something else. And then you'll go pivot and create that other thing that the market truly wants, and then it'll be, it has more of a chance of being a success. And there are times where you get so locked on doing the thing you're doing and so focused on it that you don't hear the market feedback and make the pivots that you should make. And I think I'm pretty good about that. But like when I built FundAmerica, which became Prime, I had a lot of people in the crypto industry coming to me wanting to use our services, and I was very focused on the securities industry. And I just kept saying no to people. I'm like, yeah, it's tulip bulbs. It's a lot of fraud, and I don't want to get involved in it. And I wasn't going to do it. And one of my board members who was involved in crypto, and he was part of T0 and a lot of things that were happening on the crypto side. He pretty much dragged me into it, kicking and screaming. He like, you need to pivot, wake up and listen to what the market is selling, or what the market is telling you. And so I finally heard that and did, and we became one of the most important businesses in the entire crypto uh, world, while at the same time became the 800-pound gorilla in the securities issuance or securities industry for running escrow services and compliance and things like that. So we held true to our mission, but also expanded other things. But I didn't pivot as fast as I should have to that, because I just stayed too focused on the thing that I was doing and wasn't really listening. But when I finally did pivot, it became, very, very big.
You've kind of accumulated all this knowledge on a space, or you accumulated like a way to build a company. How do you kind of go back to the basics, or stay in that zone where you can look with fresh perspectives on the actual problem?
Well, it's like a problem, like in math. If you've become very good at math over years of education and work, you can be presented with a problem. You still wind up following the same steps to solving the problem that you did when you were a freshman before you received your PhD, right? It's still the same steps. But now that you received a PhD, you see the end result of the problem more clear. You see the entire problem through different eyes than when you were a freshman. But the steps to solve it may be no different than when you first started out in mathematics. And that's true for entrepreneurship. When you start a business, no matter how clear I see the company that I'm going to build and what the end result is going to be like, acknowledging that there's going to be pivots along the way,
Hmm.
but still have to go file incorporation papers, write up the vision notes and the engineering notes, hiring the team and finding the right people to do the startup steps of this thing. That doesn't change. You still have to know how to start to get from point A to point Z.
Okay, and last question for you here on, is there a fear that drives you? Anything you're scared of that actually drives you?
Fear is failing to build the things that the thing that we're doing, failing to execute on it. I have made horrific mistakes in financial partners with the company. I have made horrific mistakes hiring people in key executive roles that I entrusted with power to do things that I couldn't do. Often I was out raising capital or selling, and so relied on people to like run operations, and then they completely screwed it up and it caused the failure of the company. So I'm terrified of making those kinds of errors that can screw up the company. It's painful when other people screw up the thing, your baby, the thing you created to fill a market need, the thing you built that provides employment and a wonderful work environment and culture for so many people, and other people come in and kill it.
I wanted to ask you about competition. How do you view competition in a space like fintech where we know it's kind of already crowded?
I like Elon Musk's attitude towards competition, that he doesn't really pay much mind to it. He just does what he does to fulfill his vision. Especially once he understands that there's a market need for what he's doing. Their payments industry is huge, many, many trillions of dollars. It's ferociously competitive with not just banks and neobanks and payment service companies and all kinds of companies involved in it. So if you look at just the outside of it, I should be terrified of competition. How can I do this? But nobody's doing it the way I'm doing it. And I already know what I'm doing. There's an appetite for it. People want it. It solves problems. It solves problems in ways nobody else is doing. Um, People say, yeah, but whatever XYZ competitor could do what you're doing. Well, that's true. And when Bezos decided to sell books online, Barnes and Noble and Borders could do it too. So just because there are people that are doing something similar, or just because there are people who could do what you're doing, doesn't mean they will. So I don't think much about it. I just focus on building what we're building and getting to market as quickly as I can, not because I worry about competition, but because I'm excited to see this get used and for people to adopt it and form habits on it and to solve problems for them and changes lives. That's why Gigpay exists.
Do you plan for acquisitions? Is that something that you look to as part of that vision? Is that you see the acquisition, or is that something that just is a natural flow state?
But I mean, I'm not building this company because of that. The reality is when you're talking to investors, investors want a return on their money and they want to know what the exit strategy is. And everybody always parrots the same thing when they're talking about an exit strategy, an acquisition or an IPO. This is the kind of company, yeah, it could IPO. Obviously, Square is a public company, PayPal slash Venmo is a public company, and others. The reality is we probably get gobbled up by somebody. A lot of people in payments. We're doing things that are innovative. We have some really, really cool technology. We'll gain traction, we'll get adoption, and that'll be attractive to somebody that's going to want to write a check that gets the attention of the investors. That probably happens, but right now I spend literally zero time thinking about it.
Okay. Last question. If you had a biography, what would you title it?
My favorite quote is from Kipling, one of his poems called The Merry Gloucester. I have it on my wall. So I didn't begin with askings. I took my job and I stuck. I took the chances they wouldn't, and now they're calling it luck. So
You don't believe necessarily in luck.
you make your own luck, but there is always an element of luck in what you do and when you get started. So, no matter how good your ability to sell is, no matter how good your product execution is, no matter how well you've established product market fit, you always have things that can happen competitively from a regulatory perspective, internally. There's always shit that can go wrong. And there's always some shit that goes right that comes out of the blue. You get a call from, you're building PayPal and somebody comes to you with pain called eBay
Hmm.
and adopts you as their payment platform. That's, you know, they made their own luck. Elon and, Jack and the guys there, they made their own luck with that. But that was luck, right? That eBay would come and rely on a startup instead of just not doing business with a startup, right? So there's a lot of that happens. So you've got to have some luck as well along the way.
Yes. Well, Scott, thank you so much for joining and for sharing your journey. I think just from the way you've described your journey, I feel like a there's just a lot of optimism with which you look at things. Even when you didn't say like things aren't necessarily bad but hard, just the words you use to describe your journey, I feel like shows like you're just always ready for the next thing. And so thank you for joining, and I hope people get something out of this
All right,
conversation.
thanks. That's fun.